Father, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts bless your name. Amen. Eyewitnesses reported passengers refusing to get into lifeboats. There weren't enough lifeboats for every passenger on board anyway, but the first lifeboat launched had only 12 passengers on it, even though it could hold 40. The passengers had all sorts of reasons for not getting into the lifeboats. They were on a massive ship that was supposed to be unsinkable. Why would they choose to get on one of these small wooden boats, swaying on ropes in the dark over the cold ocean when they felt perfectly safe? They didn't want to split up their families. And lifeboats were being let down with plenty of room still left in them. And so obviously, if there was a real emergency, everyone would be trying to escape, to evacuate. But too many people were choosing not to leave the ship. And so the crowds followed. They stayed back. And I'm assuming that you all sort of recognize the historic ship I'm referring to. Curious kids in the room. Do you know of a famous unsinkable ship that sunk? Yes. The Titanic. Yep, exactly. Yes. Technically, it is not unsinkable. Jasmine, you are exactly right. That is the great irony of the Titanic. About 1,500 people died when the Titanic sunk. Only about 700 survived. And while the available lifeboats could never have saved everyone on board, I'm fascinated by the people who could have survived but chose not to get into the lifeboat. Right? I mean, they faced a real choice. The giant, unsinkable, or so they thought, Jasmine, right, ship that they were on. I mean, everyone's ideal of safety was the real danger to them, while the little, cold, scary lifeboats were their salvation. And it's not every day that we are faced with like such obvious life and death decisions. And even when we are, they rarely seem to come to us in so dramatic of terms. And yet, this is the story, this is the choice that is played out again and again in the lives of God's people. Moses makes this choice explicit for the Israelites as they prepare to enter the promised land. Deuteronomy 30, he says to the crowds, "See, I have set before you today life and good, death and evil. Choose life, that you and your offspring, your children, will live, loving Yahweh your God, obeying his voice and holding fast to him, for he is your life and length of days." The Israelites had been a nomadic people for the last 40 years. And as Moses is speaking to them, they don't have a real army. They don't have any real weapons. And they're being led into a land where big, tall, strong warriors live and where cities are guarded with walls and weapons. And Moses says to them, it might seem safest to stay where you are at, out in the wilderness, but actually God wants you to follow him into a scary and dangerous situation. But he is with you. And with God is the safest place you can be. I don't know if we always believe this. It feels like one of those things that's easy to say, harder to trust and live. But the Israelites will follow God into the land, and they will find life there. And while Israel has moments, right, where they listen to God and where they listen to his voice and they trust him, I mean, the story of Israel is mostly a story of death and evil. And at almost every point, they turn their hearts away from God and they do not listen to him, and they worship other gods and they follow other voices. And when I say that they choose death, I mean, by the end of their time in the land, I mean, they are actually killing one another, their brothers, choosing evil as they sacrifice their children to Molech. After hundreds of years in the land, choosing death and choosing evil, they are at this place where they have lost almost everything. And the last remaining people have barricaded themselves inside Jerusalem, right? Their capital city, as the mighty Babylonian army has surrounded them. This violent and vicious army is surrounding them and is preparing to attack. And for Israel, this actually isn't the first time that they have been in Jerusalem as the city has been surrounded by an enemy army. There was a time before, and in a desperate moment, the king sought God and prayed for help and begged God to save them, and God answered. The enemy was destroyed, and God's people were saved on that day. But this is a new day, a different day. And a prophet named Jeremiah makes it clear there is only one way out of this city alive. And in Jeremiah 21, verse 8, we hear Jeremiah say, well, to this people you shall say, Jeremiah is told this, thus says Yahweh, behold, I set before you the way of life and the way of death. We keep hearing this kind of phrase. He who stays in this city shall die by the sword, by famine, by pestilence. But he who goes out and surrenders to the Babylonians who are besieging you shall live and shall have his life as a prize of war. Consider this. You are in a large, unsinkable ship. I wish you guys could see the face that Jasmine just made of me. She goes, really unsinkable? I know. You think it's unsinkable. Jerusalem, the city of God, has never been conquered. Surely, God would never let anything happen to his very own city. And the prophet says to you, the ship is going down. God has provided a lifeboat. This is your only chance to live. But what is the lifeboat? The lifeboat in this moment is the violent army, enemy army, standing outside of your door. They, your enemies, are your salvation. The enemy that has leveled every town in your country and taken some of your family members away as prisoners, they are your safe passage. The choice couldn't be any more clear or distinct or difficult, right? Stay in the ship or leave. Stay in the city or leave. And in this instance, no choice is a choice. This is actually the same dynamic at work in Jesus' teaching this morning. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, when we hear Jesus say, the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. Why is it so easy? Because it's often the default option. Right? It's the option that doesn't require you to do anything. It's the option that doesn't require change. You choose by doing nothing. If you're on the Titanic, right? You just feel safe and secure. Why would you ever choose to leave the ship unless you had to? Your default setting is just stay on the ship. But for almost 90 minutes, no one believed they had to escape. It made zero sense to them why this perfectly fine ship that was made for this could be in danger. But by the time they had to escape, it was too late. The same is true as God's people sat securely in Jerusalem. Everything about staying seemed safer. Everything about leaving seemed more dangerous. But the people on the Titanic were wrong, and so were God's people in the city of Jerusalem. The thing that looks safe isn't always safe. And the thing that looks scary can actually be the way of life. But how can you tell which is which? I mean, there's no universal answer. Because we have in the Bible 2 different stories of Jerusalem surrounded, and in one instance, God says, I will protect you. And he protects them one way. And then in the next instance, he says, I have provided a way out for you. And it is a totally different way. There is a similar dynamic at work in Jeremiah's day as in the days of Jesus. Jeremiah says to the people, Yahweh says, I set before you the way of life and the way of death. And the thing that he's doing is he's helping them hear the actual voice of God from God himself. And with God's voice present, the choice for the people in Jerusalem is really clear. They can trust God's city, or they can trust in God's personal word to them. God's people have a long history of trusting in the things of God rather than the words of God. God gives his people gifts, and we quickly cling to those gifts, while God continues to speak. And sometimes the gifts that God has given us keep us from being able to hear his voice. God had personally claimed Jerusalem as his own. The point of Jerusalem was that God would live with his people. I mean, the city of Jerusalem is this sign that our God is a deeply relational God who just wants to be close to us. That God would pick this place and say, come here and you can encounter me in the most real and present way possible. I mean, the existence of that city was so profound because it was a sign that God wanted to be close to his people and that they could be close to him, that he had promised to speak with them, and that they could seek him and find him. But instead, and it doesn't take long, the people, they adopt this sort of magical view of the city where surely God would never let anything happen to his personal city. And so if we are in it, it's like we're on base. Like if you're playing tag and there's a base. And because you're on base, you can't get tagged. That's the way people treated Jerusalem and the temple. We're in it, we're good. It's what they had come to believe. And so in the face of an enemy, They don't listen for current instructions. Like, God, what should we be doing? From God. They don't seek God. They just default to trusting in the city for their protection. That's wild, because while God is speaking a fresh word to them, they cannot hear him because their trust is in the wrong place, and they are going to destroy themselves. Jesus says the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. Staying in the city is easy, but destruction is coming. During Jesus' day, there were a lot of easy ways for a person to follow God, to walk with God. Following the commandments, for one, wasn't that hard. Don't murder. It's kind of easy. I mean, right, obviously not for everyone. There are people who struggle with that one. But that's like an extreme minority of human beings who are murdering. And so for the most part, most of us are pretty good at not murdering. The not was so important in there, and it just fell out. I mean, the same is true with stealing. Like, for the most part, the average person isn't walking into stores and just taking stuff. And there are people who struggle with it, whatever. And then there's religious practices, like praying and fasting and giving money to the poor. I mean, you'll recognize some of this in the Sermon on the Mount. Praying is pretty easy. I mean, there are people who don't go to church, who don't do any number of things that we would consider like a Christian thing, but they pray. Praying, anybody can just talk out loud to some higher power. Praying is pretty easy. Fasting, going without something for some short, finite period of time, it can be tough, but most of us can do a little bit of it, of some kind. Give money to the poor, okay? We like to help people. We like to be good people. Easy, easy, easy. There was a way of following God that the people around Jesus had grown up with that was normal. It was their habit. It was their pattern. It was the way of life, and sort of everyone was doing it. There were these cultural norms that created social pressure that you just grew up into, and that made a lot of this stuff kind of easier to do. And almost everyone in Jesus' community followed these patterns. The way was wide. Yeah, there were outliers, right? And they get named. Yeah, there were these Jewish tax collectors who would steal from their own countrymen, and they'd get called out for being terrible. And there were women who made money having sex, and there were other sorts of sinners around. Generically, we just told sinners were around. But these were all considered the exception to normal society. For the most part, the Jewish society Jesus shows up in is pretty civil. And the people are generally, broadly committed to living lives that looked godly. But that is where Jesus' words come to life. Jesus is surrounded by people, a bunch of people who look buttoned up. The scribes and the Pharisees are the best examples, and there are lots who are trying to be like them and imitating them. But I mean, really, they're mostly decent people. They're faithful in their marriages. They honor their parents. They give money away to those in need. They give good gifts to their children. They work hard. They keep the Sabbath. They go to the synagogue to hear God's word read, and they go to the temple to worship. I mean, by the measures of the day, these people are righteous. According to anyone around, they were living rightly. They were models of right living. Except Jesus says they're on a sinking ship. That they are living safe, default lives, easy lives. And they're on a path toward destruction. And it's worth, I think, making the jump from Jesus' world to maybe consider what it might look like for us. And I think if we took those who were around during Jesus' time as the sort of average person, we just thought about, we're talking about churchgoers who say their prayers and who go to church on a regular basis and are nice people. We're talking about people who give money away, who volunteer their time for church and in the local PTA, and they work hard, and they coach kids' sports, and they're good neighbors, and they try to be good parents and good spouses. These might be a modern-day equivalent to the majority of the people gathered around Jesus in the Gospels, doing a bunch of God-related things, and yet still potentially disconnected from God and from God's heart. That you can be doing a bunch of fine things, and your hearts can be untouched by God's holy love. Jesus brings us to the end of his sermon. A sermon in which he tells us to do some stuff. But a sermon that he opens by saying, listen, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And now he presses us at the end of the sermon with a choice. Will we cling to the sinking ship of the scribes and the Pharisees? Or will we jump in to the lifeboat Jesus offers us? Will we be content with living a nice, clean, orderly, respectable life? A safe life that the majority of people would be totally happy with? Or will we risk everything by letting God actually change our hearts? Will we choose to undergo heart surgery when we aren't fully convinced our hearts are actually in danger of a heart attack? Do we really want Jesus to mess with us in a deep, transformative way? As we come to the end of the Sermon on the Mount, and this is a question that we are confronted with. Will we let Jesus change us from the inside out? And not just clean up the outside a bit. I mean, it's pretty easy for us to not murder. And so we could sort of move on and say, got that one. But I really wonder what it would look like. What would our lives look like if our hearts were free from anger? What would it look like for anger to be gone from our lives, from our hearts? How strange would we look? How extreme would our lives look if we were just so busy making things right with one another and with our neighbors and with our enemies? If we were so busy making peace and trying to bless those who may have hurt us, we look at the implications of a transformed heart. We look at some of the things that Jesus says might flow out of us, and we go, I don't know if I want that life, or that life seems really scary and uncertain. Listening to Jesus and following him does not seem like a safe way to live. I don't know. I often feel like I'm fine where I'm at. The ship doesn't feel like it's in trouble. My heart's probably fine or good enough. I don't know if I want a new heart, new motivations. I'm not sure if I need one. But Jesus says, the easy ship is going down. A life where all we do is manage our actions and our external stuff. It leads only to destruction. And if you do nothing, you have made a choice. God told his people, the choice that looks scary is actually the safe one, because it's the one I'm leading you to. And Jesus shows us the way. Jesus, as we read in Philippians, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking the very nature of a servant. As I hear those lines from Philippians, I hear Jesus leaving the safety of the Titanic and getting into the lifeboat. I hear Jesus leaving safety, what appears to be the safest place. The analogy breaks down a little bit. Heaven is clearly the safest place. But he's taking a step that is risky and that will cost him something. But he will do the Father's will. And as we come to the table this morning, we remember that we don't face a choice that we have to somehow make on our own, that we have to be strong enough to make, but we make a choice. We're invited to make a choice that Jesus has made first and for us. And as we attempt to make it, he is with us and he is saying, I will make your heart capable of this kind of choice. And so we come to the table this morning to remember what God has done for us, making this choice possible for us, to respond to all that God has done, to find our home in him, and to find ourselves loved and chosen and embraced as sons and daughters.